this is about affordable housing, but I thought that maybe it would be of interest for this global opportunity of exchanging to share with you some thoughts that I had about this new phenomenon that we are seeing in Latin America that we call the new informality. And also discuss a little bit about the lessons that we learned from what we now define as the classic informality in Latin America and the Caribbean. As you may know, the Latin American and Caribbean region right now reached about 600 million people in 2023. Of those, 120 million people live in an informal settlement. That means that 1 of every 5 persons in Latin America lives in a squatter settlement. Maybe the highest percentages are seen in Nicaragua, Guatemala, Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, Honduras, and El Salvador. But it's present in every single one of the countries in the region. And as we see the informal settlements, or the what we see as the popular housing, is a response of the lack of effective and also scale is at the scale of the issue that we have of needs for housing, popular housing, low income housing in our cities. And we have this picture is very common to see in the larger cities in Latin America. And we said that the classic informality started in the 20th century, especially in the 50s, and went on until the 90s. Their characteristics that normally will be either an spontaneous occupation or taking of land near to the city services, prompted by massive migrations that normally were coming from rural areas, but all in sometimes due to political unrest or also catastrophes. And what we also saw that was very common in this kind of informality is that we saw how progressively they became consolidated. We saw a self-building, aided urbanization that happened post-settlement, and also that they normally were very vulnerable areas to climate change. And also another interesting characteristic is that we normally saw houses that were shared by multiple families. In the 2000s, we saw a new phenomenon. We saw that actually most of the what we call the precarious settlements or the informal settlements became more and more consolidated, and they became even more densified, reaching 3, 4, 5 stories in one lot. Also, we saw how they became consolidated with the funding that most of the families will send back from remittance.
Irayda is okay. Anyone can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes.
I can hear you.
Okay. Where is Irayda? It looks like she has been cut off. Okay, let's wait. Okay, you're back.
Yes, I'm sorry.
No problem.
Okay,
Yeah.
share this again. We keep going. So another, as I said, what we see that there is different in this new informality is that we also start to see now is not taking land, but actually we saw private landlords and public lands also being made available for distribution, but it was just lots, land without services or only with temporary services out there for sale. We start to see also an informal market of renters within the squatter settlements, where, in more consolidated structures, they start to trade for rent some of the spaces within those areas. So the classic informality normally was happen in two ways. One will be an individual that will go and settle in a particular piece of land. They will take the land, and then they will start to construct, starting from using recycling materials, very informal, and over time, the family will be able to use more formal materials, blocks, cement, etc., and then they will have eventually made their home. In other cases, we saw collective groups of people taking over larger parcels or areas of land. They will get organized, and also they could be completely spontaneous. And over time, what we saw that was a characteristic of this type of squatter settlements is that we see a progressive process in which they become consolidated and somewhat formalized. In some cases, through some public programs that will help to have access to services. And then, for example, this is one program that I work on in Guatemala for several years with the International Development Bank. And what we did, the Inter-American Development Bank, I'm sorry. And what we did there will be, trying to bring, to help the communities to become more resilient, because as I mentioned before, they were extremely vulnerable to all the flooding and earthquakes and things like that. So normally we will work on bringing in basic services such as water, sewage facilities, water treatment, electricity, paving streets, providing some mitigation and adaptation measures. It will be also a reforestation of some areas that should not be used for further expanding the settlements. And that was kind of a policy that was implemented actually throughout the entire region. And as a result, we see, for example, here is in the left a graphic from Rio, and we see how back in the 2009, most of the districts were lacking of services, and over time we see how they move into having more and more services. In the other case, we are showing how the comprehensive improvement programs that were developed throughout the region were bringing in different kinds of basic services, especially to bring urbanization and make them more resilient over time. And that was considered a success, although it was never able to reach the entirety of the extension of all the settlements. And before we were able to even fix that problem, I mean, completely, say, urbanize the squatter settlements in the region, now we see that they have evolved into a new informality. The new informality could come from two sectors, one from the private and one also from the public sector. In the private sector, we see how owners of land that are near, the outskirts of metropolitan areas start to subdivide land in lots. They don't take any permits, they don't provide any services, and of course, they are completely unplanned. What we normally see as the main source of resources that finance this or allow the families to purchase the land from these individuals are either remittances that come from abroad, or also we see how money laundering also plays a role through other, underground markets that exist in those areas. And in the public, we also have seen some municipalities, especially in small towns or medium-sized towns that are growing rapidly or getting more urbanized very rapidly. A political leader may subdivide public land without services. And often the subdivisions take place far from employment centers. In these cases, we are seeing that the way that these get financed or they get aid or sometimes come from even private donors, churches, or different other players that are rising with more often in this context. So we are no longer seeing that used to be a problem was the uncertainty of the property. Actually, this is land that is being purchased. And here, for example, we are seeing one city. This is called Ipala, Chiquimula. In this area, maybe 70% of the families have a relative that works abroad, especially in the United States. And you see that the size of this town in 1985. And if we look at how after the city got to start the migration, start to rise around 2000, and by 2011, the city has grown at least 5 to 6 times. By 2024, has grown 20 times. And here we see, for example, one development that was made by the municipality in this case, which is just a piece of land that was public land that was given to families that did not have a place to live, and they were just given the lot without any kind of service. The way that this project is actually this urban development is now being formalized is through the support from private donors, NGOs, churches, and things of that nature. So we see that how the access to land is playing in this logic of squatter settlements that are expanding in Latin America at this point. We have on one hand, like the logic of the state that goes into policy and programs. We have the logic of the free market, and we also have the logic of the necessity. For the classic informality, there was a combination between the logic of the state and the logic of the necessity, where we used to have the need for clear title, regularize the situation of the community, provide urban infrastructure, and build affordable housing. Those were the 3 lines of programs that we saw as a focus to confront the informality or the classic informality last century. But now, with the new informality, we see that we are looking at a new market rising, providing lots without services, and also how these informal markets of consolidated informal settlements are becoming more dense and increasing, also creating a market of renters within the same squatter settlements. For example, you see here, this is a development in Lima, Peru. It's about 300 hectares. It's an immense area of development. It's an old mining site, and now is being developed, as you can see, in a very informal and sprawl way. So the shape of the informality, what does it mean from the urban structure standpoint? Well, we have more informal markets arising, and then we see that there is a submarket of consolidated settlements. On one hand, the new informality looks like after the squatter settlements became more formalized or more improved, there a submarket of consolidated built-up structures and more densified structures have arisen. So we have a more compact city that in many ways, also because it has been a non-regulated construction, has become somewhat vulnerable in many ways. On the other hand, we have those new submarkets of informal sprawl that is now rising around the metropolitan areas in Latin America, and those tend to be very diffuse. So, as Pedro Abramo from the University of Rio was pointed out, we are looking at a new informality that is, on the one side, more compact in the old squatters, and then more diffuse in the new squatters. So we have, as he called it, a more confused environment. And this is how it looks. For example, Comuna 1 in Medellin, as you can see, the average size of these structures is 4 or 5 stories. On the other hand, West Panama is a completely sprawled informal new squatter settlement at the north of Panama City, and this is the dilemma. We have two extremes, the two sides of the coin, playing at the same time in looking at the informal settlements. So last year, as a part of the Federation of Urban Planners, the Ibero-American Federation of Urban Planners, we had a two-day session with Central American planners discussing the lessons that we have learned from classic informality to face the new informality. And, we have 5 key points. One is that we believe that to have better policy regarding how we are facing informality in the region, we need to redefine the status quo. It's essential to seek maybe new and more innovative ways to address these challenges of the new informality, recognizing the role of new actors and sources of funding, as well as exploring new avenues for positive change. While we see that maybe squatter settlements used to be perceived as a problem per se, but now we see them as a reality that we need to transform into part of the solution to the affordable housing in the region. Then, of course, resource scarcity remains a fundamental challenge addressing informality, because comprehensive neighborhood improvement, which is what they need, takes a lot of resources. And the lack of resources in the cities and in the region, especially in medium-sized cities and larger metropolitan areas, remains a big challenge to face. We believe that we must continue this dialogue because it's very important to try to have a collaborative relationship between municipalities and central governments, as well as academic institutions and NGOs, to really look for ways to tackle these new challenges. Of course, we believe that it's very important to map these new actors. For example, what we call these developers, or not developers, but actually sellers of land, plus everything that is related to them. We must have a more effective collaboration. So we believe that it's important to have work together with these new markets, or understanding these new players' interest, and how we can actually join them and work together towards a more formal process to respond to the need for affordable housing. And finally, the importance of sharing what we are learning. In many countries, we have, of course, our own contextual differences, but we believe that there is a lot of similarities, and also a big wealth of learning that has been coming from different relationships, working with grassroots organizations, involving the social leadership in each of these neighborhoods, as much as also trying to work with the new political leaders to understand better how we can work in a more strategic manner towards giving solutions that are of the scale of the problem of the need of affordable housing in the region. And that's my presentation.